Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, or evening, wherever you happen to be coming from. For those who don't know me yet, I'm Ron Levine from Mindfulness and Blue Jeans, and I stumbled ass backwards into mindfulness and insight meditation in 1998 during a time when I was suffering from clinical anxiety and depression, a raging panic disorder that had erupted into full-blown agoraphobia. I was trapped at home, I was on disability, couldn't go past the front door without having a meltdown, and happened to get paired up with a psychologist who was already several decades deep into mindfulness and insight meditation practice, both as a practitioner and a teacher. And this is what he offered me as a way to work with my issues, and I was not impressed. My feeling was that I needed to be able to live again, to be able to go past the front door again, to be able to work again, and here's this guy talking about the breathing. Huh? I stuck with it just so that I could tell him, look, this isn't working, and can I have the real treatment now? That was almost 25 years ago, and here I am, still practicing, now teaching, and I've never had that conversation with him. So here we are. One of the things that I found in the course of dealing with some of my issues, like anxiety, depression, so forth, is that some of my other issues that maybe weren't quite as intense, but were still bubbling beneath the surface, like anger, indirectly ended up being addressed. And we'll come back to that a little bit when we start getting into the guided practice in about 20 minutes or so. The first thing I want to mention about anger is the interesting language that we have around it. Blind rage, seeing red. Or I think of when I experience very intense anger and I think about it afterwards, I actually visualize what I was going through in this sort of tunnel vision. I realized I was looking at things through like this tunnel vision. Anger gives us these sort of, not physical our eyes, but this mental visual limitation. Unclear seeing, which is why I called this blind rage to clear seeing. So clearly, anger has some downsides to it. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be here talking about it. But it's still a thing. So why? Those of you who have been with me for a little while, maybe have taken a couple of my workshops, you know that I tend to take an evolutionary perspective on things because a lot of these quirks of the human condition that don't seem to make a lot of sense suddenly do make a lot of sense within the context of evolution. And anger, I believe, is one of those. If we want to find an upside to anger or a function for anger, if you think of fight or flight, it's part of fight. It's for survival. Anger gave us that energy boost and that same sort of focus that tunnel vision is a characteristic of in order to do what we needed to do in a given moment to survive. Happening at a mental level, happening at a physical level. Heart rate increases, our sinuses clear so we can get more air in. Anger has the function of helping us gain or regain control in the face of threat. Help us get out of harm's way. Now, I saw an interesting post about 2 weeks ago from the Dalai Lama, and I want to read this for you. Like anyone else, I too have anger in me. However, I try to recall that anger is a destructive emotion. I remind myself that scientists now say that anger is bad for our health. It eats into our immune system. So anger destroys our peace of mind and our physical health. We shouldn't welcome it or think of it as natural or as a friend. I am not in the habit of calling out His Holiness the Dalai Lama. But he does not have my full agreement on that. I do agree with some of it. Anger is ultimately harmful to us if it is sustained. Just like stress. The fight or flight stuff that, again, I talk about in some of my other sessions, these are meant to be one and done sorts of things to get us out of a bad situation, not something that should be chronic, habitual. Yes, that will become destructive. But to say that anger is not natural, I don't buy that. How is an emotion unnatural? My hunch is there may be some language barrier here. Or maybe we really just do think differently on this. I have 6 cats. My wife used to volunteer at feline shelters, so I've seen a lot of feral cats. I feel like anger is pretty natural. I think it's natural. Not only is it natural, but because of its function, while it can be bad for our health if it's chronic, I would submit that anger can be good for our health. And the kinds of examples I was giving earlier about getting us out of a harmful situation. There is a function here. So what's important to recognize are 2 things. One is that I like to say anger is an inside job. What do I mean by that? Well, coincidentally, one of the examples I give a lot in my sessions is how somebody out on the street might react if we were to flip them off. And to compare that with what might happen if we flipped off the Dalai Lama. We'd probably get 2 very different reactions. Which means what? There's nothing inherent in the finger that we are using to flip off the recipient. The reaction is dependent necessarily on the recipient. What we find angering is really on us. It has to be. Otherwise, everybody would react the same exact way to the same exact stimulus. So the first thing is to recognize that anger is an inside job. Not saying this as a blame thing, saying it as this is what logic bears out. The second thing to recognize is the importance of how we relate to that anger. How we direct angry energy. Anger has upsides, anger has downsides. You know what else has upsides and downsides? A hammer. Depending on how it's used. Depending on how the energy of that tool is directed. So the trap that we often fall into is thinking that we only have 2 options when it comes to anger. Acting it out, and if that always worked real well, we probably wouldn't be here today, right? We wouldn't have a problem. We wouldn't be talking about this. And the other option is suppression. Same thing. If that worked real well, would we be here talking about it? Probably not. And suppression gets especially tricky in areas of spiritual practice, because now we start getting into spiritual bypassing. You know, that stuff that's like, oh, I have a spiritual practice. I meditate. I don't get angry. Okay. The Dalai Lama, by the way, in what he talked about, another phrase that he used that I want to call attention to here is, and I do agree with this one, but there's a subtle nuance. He said, we shouldn't welcome it. We shouldn't welcome it. That doesn't mean it is unwelcome. There's a difference between not welcoming something. In other words, that's a verb. It's what we're doing. It's really a neutral action. We're simply not welcoming. There's a big difference between that and saying that thing is unwelcome. Ascribing a negative to this concept, to this emotion. There's a subtle difference there. So we have these options that we're trying to decide between of, well, do I just let the shit out? I mean, that's what the psychologists say, right? Don't bottle it up, all that. Or keep that shit under wraps. Because maybe that's what we were taught. And well-intentioned, that's what we were taught. Doesn't really work in practice, as many of us have found out the hard way. And what I have found is Yeah, there are these two options, but they're not two discrete options. These are just two extreme ends of what I have found to be a continuum of other choices. For example, I have a story I've told many times because it was one of my most profound early experiences, and I'm going to tell it again with a slightly different perspective. Because usually I'm talking about it in the context of anxiety, but anger applies here as well, and very crucially so. When I was housebound with agoraphobia, I had to very gradually learn how to get back out into the world again, literally starting by walking around the block, and then worked my way up to walking around 2 blocks, and then 3 blocks, and gradually started to drive again, very short distances, then a little longer. And after, I don't know, a few weeks, a month of this, I went on what at that time had been my longest drive so far. For those of you in the Boston area, I live in Waltham, and the next town over is Newton. And I drove from our apartment in Waltham to Newton Center, which is probably about 10, 12 minutes, maybe 15. Which for me at the time was a journey, a hell of a thing. And I went and parked in the Newton Center T-stop, that little inlet they have there on Union Street. There's a bunch of little shops, or at least back then there were. I don't know what's there today. I haven't been down there in a while. And there was a gift shop, and I went walking in and just started looking at some cards on one of those carousels that they have. And I suddenly realized, if I start having a meltdown, I'm screwed. I can't get out of here and home fast enough if I start to have a panic attack. And of course, that very thought was enough to get the wheels going, right? And I started to feel the heart rate pick up, the stomach start to lurch. I was like, oh, fuck. Here we go. And then I realized, I can't do anything about this. I can't do anything about this if this is going to happen here. No, I can't get out fast enough. And there was a little part of me that had become so fed up. There was just this spark of anger that gave me that little extra energy. And I thought, you know what? Fuck it. If we're going to do this, do it. Do it. What do you got? What do you got? Let's give these people a show. What? What's up? And as soon as I did that, everything just dropped. Everything calmed. What I realized afterwards was that spark of anger was no longer being directed toward this perceived threat from within, really. I'm not trusting my own mind and body not to sell me out. The anger at that moment was not directed towards this perceived threat. It had become directed towards this incessant fighting, this civil war I was waging, and actually gave me the energy to stop wielding my weapons and to drop them. And what I discovered was that when I dropped my weapons, there was no other side. There was no fight. The only fight that was there was the one I was bringing and waging. And once I stopped fighting, everything calmed. And that's why this was such a profound early experience in my practice, because now I really saw, I just literally experienced disillusionment. And it was because this energy of anger wasn't acted out, was not suppressed. It was redirected and allowed me to have the willingness to open to the experience that was happening rather than trying to control it, to suppress it, to stamp it out. In effect, this gets into when I talk about sometimes the difference between power and force. Force is all about control. Power attracts, force repels. Power sustains, force drains. I stopped draining. So I discovered my power in that moment to simply be with the experience and got a much clearer view of what it actually was, what was actually playing out. Other variations on this, like when we're dealing with other people, there's a huge difference between being angry at a person and being angry with a person's actions. Two very, very different things. Sometimes we realize that the anger we feel towards another person really has a lot more to do with how upset we are when we are confronted with the reality that we cannot control that person. Again, you hear that word control, you think force. It's not power. We think power to control other people. No, we don't have the power to control other people. Barely are able to use our power to control ourselves, right? How are we going to control somebody else? That's force. We start to realize where force has its limitations. I want to use a slightly different example for our practice today because this is a difficult thing to have a practice around. The reason I say that is because when I teach, typically what I'm teaching is being with whatever is coming up right now. Not really trying to think back to something and dredge up an emotion for the sake of working with it. So this is a little difficult because we're talking about anger, and I want to have a guided sitting that helps us work with that. But at the same time, I'm not necessarily advocating that if you don't feel angry right now, get pissed off about something. You certainly may if you want. Again, I have no control over you. So you can certainly do that if you wish. So what I'm going to do, and this gets back to what I was mentioning earlier about working on anger, how I ended up working on anger indirectly through all my work with anxiety. I'm going to present another example from my past, which again, some of you have probably heard before. And we're going to find a way to work with this such that if you're not feeling pissed off right now and don't want to, you don't have to, okay? The example I most often give from my past with anger, another very profound experience for me, was one day when I was driving to work, probably close to 10 years ago now. I was driving on, again, if you're in the Boston area, Route 95. I was driving on Route 95. I know, shocking. Somebody cut me off. And in that moment, I noticed my anger, but caught it really quickly and decided to just observe what was going on below the jawline. Most of the early years of my practice, I was very focused above the jawline because anxiety, psychology background, I'm very analytical, left-brained, thinking about stuff. At this point, I was starting to work with what's going on below the jawline. And I did that. And instead of spinning the storylines about that asshole and what he did and what I want to do to him and playing it over and over again in my mind, I just came to the body. And I noticed this unbelievable heat, just this searing heat coming from my lower stomach up into my chest and spreading throughout. If this had just happened from out of nowhere, I'd have driven straight to the hospital. Like, what the hell is going on? I'm noticing this and the intensity of it, because goddamn, it was intense. This sort of shock started to come over me, like, is this what's happening every time I get angry and I'm so caught up in the storylines that I just never noticed? I mean, this is a hell of a physical reaction. And that's with me just observing it and not perpetuating it through the storylines. Like, holy crap. Has this been happening every single time over the years? And the other thing that I noticed was when I got to work, I had largely forgotten about it. And later that morning, I suddenly remembered it and I was like, oh wow, that happened this morning, didn't it? When normally that was the kind of thing I'd have been carrying with me actively for hours. So I learned a few interesting things from that. One, again, there's a large continuum between acting it out and suppressing it. Because I really fully experienced it. I also noticed how powerful it was to break that mind-body cycle. If we come completely within the body and direct our attention there, there's no more of that feedback loop. Because what we're playing in our mind, our subconscious mind and body doesn't know the difference between what we're imagining and what's actually happening. If we get cut off on the road and we get pissed off and play it over in our mind another 20 times, guess what? Your mind and body thinks you got cut off 21 times. And the mind and body just keep confirming for each other. There's a situation here. Bringing the mind, directing the attention wholly to the physical experience effectively severs that connection. So it really does become one of those scenarios of like a coward dies 1,000 times, a hero dies once, or, sort of one of those things. And something else very important that I realized. A lot of times what I say in this practice is we're watching the process of things instead of getting caught up in the content. What I realized was, like anything else, really like anything else, anger is not a thing. It's not this static thing. Anger is a process that we experience. And as I mentioned in our last session, I think, we are not passive recipients of our experience. If we were, I'd have had no choice as to how I approached getting cut off that day. Or any of the other times I did and maybe didn't handle it as well. There's a big difference between spinning the storylines and observing the process of us spinning the storylines and the effect that it has. When we make a skillful choice in one instance, that lays the groundwork for us to do it again next time. And I can't tell you how many times I have experienced some kind of happy horse shit out on the road since that day and have done that exact same thing. It's like, oh, remember that time that, yeah, let's look at that again. Let's look at that again. Here's an opportunity to look at that. This is karma. This is karma. This is how we build our own experience and the potentials that we have for our experiences going forward. No one else could have done that for me. I can't do it for anybody else. But we can do it for ourselves. So with anger, what I have found is it's not about saying, oh, there's no anger here. It's not about saying, no, there shouldn't be anger here. And it's not even necessarily about saying, okay, anger's here. For me, it has become about saying, what is here? What is here? What is happening? What is being felt? Where is it being felt? What's its consistency? What's its texture? Where's it going? How's it moving? Maybe it doesn't feel like it's moving. How's the breathing feel around it? What's here? And that's when we're able to start breaking through some of these surface levels that bring us the storylines of, that guy's an asshole, to, you know what? That thing that guy did really is pissing me off. And it's reminding me of this other time that came up because of this, that, and the other thing. And we start to kind of make our way into that soil. We've got the weeds that have grown up and we're pissed off at the weed, but where are they coming from? Where's this really coming from? And we're not going to get there unless we ask, what is here? What's it trying to say? What's the message behind the message? I mentioned the difficulty of having a practice around a subject like this without dredging up previous anger or some such. But we still want to have a practice that maybe will help us lay some groundwork for perhaps the next time We experience a blind rage. So what I'm going to offer in today's sitting is this process of whatever we're experiencing in terms of storylines, mental flavors right now. Positive, negative, or neutral. Doesn't have to be bad. Bringing it to the felt experience. Really bringing our attention below the jawline. Because that is certainly something that really brought a quantum leap to my practice when I started doing it. So let's sit for a bit. If you are sitting, the one recommendation that I do make for your posture is to have your hips elevated higher than your knees. If that's not something you can do right now, not a problem. Just keep it in mind for next time. And let's begin by imagining that we are suspended from the ceiling by a string attached to the top of our heads. I usually open with this as a cue to sit up straight, but without adding any extra tension. If you're feeling some tension right now, that's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Remember our power versus force. Power is making space to experience something. Force is trying to control it. Now, are there times when it's appropriate to exercise some control? Of course. Of course. In my experience, trying to control tension, trying to exert force where there is tension, which in itself is already a kind of force, it doesn't really bear fruit. Adding tension to tension, it's never worked for me. You're welcome to try. If it works for you, let me know. Think more about the power to make space, to experience the tension that's here, if it's here. It's allowed. Just like anything else, if it's got something to say, it can say it. And then at some point, it'll leave. Maybe today, maybe not. So we're sitting up straight without adding any extra tension. And also noticing what's in contact with the floor, with a chair. Something is supporting us right now. Sometimes I find myself sitting very tensed up, as if whatever is holding me up, ground, chair, might give way at any second. I don't quite trust it. It's like I'm trying to force whatever is supporting me to keep supporting me, instead of simply allowing it to support me. I think it can handle me. I think it's got me. So we can be supported at the bottom. And we can have this gentle lift at the top. And we can make space for everything in between. Now I'd like you to bring your attention to a physical experience of the breathing. Notice if your breathing changed as a result of doing this. Usually, that's coming from some kind of a storyline. Oh, I'm supposed to be watching my breathing. I gotta have a meditative breath. I should be making this longer. I should be making this deeper. Can we not try to exert force? Can we not try to control the breathing? Can we simply make space for the breathing as it is? Allow the process that we are experiencing of breathing, something that does not require our control. The body knows how to breathe on its own. It doesn't need us to do a damn thing. Can we notice the process of breathing as it's happening? Can we notice the feeling of the passage of air just at the nose? Just there. Air is coming in. Air is going out. Just at the nose. It may be short, it may be long. Doesn't matter. You may be noticing how you might be trying to control and shape the breathing. And that's fine if you're seeing how that is happening. It is very difficult not to control the breathing in any way when we're paying attention to it. If you're finding this challenging, yeah, that's normal. For me too, by the way. As we practice for years, decades, we start to notice ever more subtle levels, how we're still controlling the breathing in ways that we weren't able to notice years earlier. So if you notice, geez, I don't know how to not control the breathing, that's fine. Don't try to exert lots of control over your control. If you're noticing there's control and you're not sure how to abandon it, that's fine. Simply observe that this is how it feels with that effort that you're putting out. And let's incorporate attention to the throat now. If storylines are coming up in the mind, lots of thoughts are coming up, it's not surprising. When we begin to focus sustained attention in one physical area, the mind likes to throw a lot of stuff at us. We can notice, okay, there's that thought, there's that thought. You're not wrong for having them. It's what the mind does. But we come back We're at the nose. And now we're at the throat. And we're feeling the passage of air. And that's all we have to do right now. Now begin to incorporate how the breathing feels in the lungs, in the chest. You may choose to focus just in that area, or you may choose to watch the passage from nose to throat to lungs, and then back out again. Whatever thoughts or feelings might be coming up, they're allowed. But they are not where we're directing our attention right now. They may become more insistent because we're not paying attention to them and we're paying attention to the breathing. That's also allowed. And that's also not where we're directing our attention right now. It's not that we're suppressing them. We're acknowledging they're here. And I guarantee you they will come back. They'll be available again after we do this. They're not going anywhere. So they are allowed to be here, but they are not the object of our attention right now. Now notice how the breathing feels in the stomach. Even if it doesn't feel like it's physically reaching the stomach. Some of us may be breathing very deeply right now and it's filling the abdomen. Some of us, maybe not at all. Either way is fine. But how does the stomach feel as we sit with the breathing? One of the challenges of working with very strong emotions, well, any emotions, but particularly with strong ones, with a lot of energy behind them. One of the challenges is that these are pre-verbal experiences. We were feeling these before we could talk, thought in words. Words themselves never really adequately describe them. They're kind of gross tools, the best we got. Can we perhaps notice how the stomach feels right now? Without necessarily trying to categorize it or squish it into words, intellectual concepts, these things that came later. Can we ask that question I posed at the end of the talk and say, what is here in the stomach? What's the feeling? Now let's widen our focus. Let's zoom out and notice the entire body and how it feels with the breathing at its core. Again, it doesn't matter if the breathing is long or short, deep or shallow. The breathing may feel pleasant. It may not feel satisfying. It may feel like we're not getting enough air in. That was always one of my fears. Oh, I'm not getting enough air in. Well, apparently I am, because I'm still here. So I realized that's a storyline. That's a feeling that reality's not bearing out. So let's see where that's coming from. What is this physical experience? From which I am now spinning a storyline, which then creates that mind-body cycle that's causing me so much suffering, so much misery, out of, in this case, apparently nothing. And again, like I did in the story I told earlier, I experienced a literal disillusionment. Oh, I guess there isn't a threat here. There's just a somewhat unpleasant feeling in the body that doesn't appear to be an actual problem. I think I'll just sit with this and check it out for a while. Ask that question. What is here? Exercising those other options on that continuum. We don't have to default to those two extremes that we so often think are our only options. Now, if you like, I do invite you to open up to whatever mind state is happening right now and simply notice, this is the mind state, and here's what I'm feeling in the body. That could be a very general mind state. I feel happy. I feel bored. I feel curious. Could be a little more specific. One of those energized emotions could be anger. Could be anxiety. Could be joy. Or you might be having a very specific thought about a particular incident, something you're worried about that's coming up. So there's this general feeling or perhaps some specific content in the mind. And there's a feeling in the body. When we sit with these things and say, what is here? And we exercise our power to make space for them to be here, we see the connection. And only once we have seen the connection can we then work with that connection skillfully. So it doesn't take us on a ride, because that doesn't usually end well. Exercising our power to make the space so we can experience the process and see the connection. And then we know how to direct our attention skillfully. Direct our energy in the right area. So we find those other options on that continuum. And exercise the best one available, even if it doesn't necessarily feel ideal. Don't let the lack of an ideal option stop you from choosing the best one available. Okay. Going to put my website in the chat for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, mindfulness-in-bluejeans.com. Along with these sessions that I do every other week, I also offer one-on-one consultations for folks who might be going through something difficult and would like to talk through it, see how the practice might be able to help out. I'm going to open it up for some Q&A. If anyone has something that they'd like to mention that came up during the practice, any observations, any thoughts. Yes, Steve.
Thank you very much for today's session. I wanted to ask you a specific question. I'm struggling with something that's creating an anger response in me. And it's actually coming from, I've recently moved to an urban area, and the cars driving by with their boom stereos is creating a reaction, a physical reaction, a mental reaction in me that it's creating a lot of distress. I know I can't control it. I'm trying to ignore it, but how do you ignore something that you feel beating in your chest? I mean, I look at these people and I think, my God, they're idiots. It's like, it's not even music. It's just vibration. It's almost as if they're looking to create distress, just to put that out there. And I was wondering if you might be able to maybe shine a light on that. And I'm open to any ideas or suggestions. I've tried the white noise machines, earplugs. Doesn't seem to work. So you don't have to respond specifically to that, but just to things that might trigger a reaction. That was just an example that I'm struggling with right now.
I think the key phrase there is triggering the reaction. One of the things that I talk about a lot is the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is that thing we don't have a choice about. Like, the way we react is the way we react. Response is where we have the choice. If we have a reaction that we don't like, the challenge becomes observing that as it plays out. Again, it's one of those things that's difficult. The way I was talking before about, well, how are we going to practice with anger? I don't want people to try and make themselves angry. The only time we can really practice with reactions is real time, when it's actually happening. There's no way to literally practice that in advance. All we can really do is do practices like the ones we just went through, where we're setting some groundwork to help make it a little bit more natural, habitual for us when the reaction comes up, to then be able to observe it and work with it a little more skillfully. Once we gain a foothold on it, it becomes a little bit easier. With that said, though, and this is more specific to your situation, one of the traps that we do sometimes fall into with this practice is the feeling of nothing should bother us. Or if this thing is causing me so much distress, then I must not be practicing right, or some variation. This is the kind of thing I bring up a lot. If somebody's, say, in an abusive situation, the practice is about resolving our own suffering. It's not about, oh, well, you're in an abusive situation and, well, okay, but your job is to, learn how to deal with being in an abusive situation and not suffer with it. No. No. You get the hell out of an abusive situation. You may very well be in a situation where you can't live there. That may be the end result here. And that may be something that you would come to realize in the course of, I'm not saying this down to you, like you would come to realize this. I mean, as a general you, this is the royal you. This is something that we can come to recognize when we watch something like this play out and say, you know what? Okay, I've gained a little bit of distance and I see what is happening and I see what my reaction is to it. And looking at this a little more objectively or what have you is, I've worked through some of that initial, the emotion that might cloud our seeing, looking at it with some clearer seeing, you might come to say, oh, you know what? Yeah, this is a bad situation. Yeah, this doesn't work for me. Do you have the force where you can control what they're doing? Clearly not. Do you have the power, as much as it might suck? Do you have the power to pick up and move somewhere else? Maybe. And that might be the most skillful thing here. Larry Rosenberg, the founder of Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, if anybody's been there, he gave this example once when I was at one of his talks. Being a practitioner, being a meditator, practicing mindfulness, it doesn't mean that you go into the supermarket and you go to all the tomatoes and they're about to get rid of this rotten tomato and you go up to, oh, don't worry about it. I'll have the rotten tomato. I practice meditation. I can eat it and just be with how terrible it is. No. That's not skillful. That's a bad situation. Or it's going to be if you eat that thing. That's not what we're doing. So spending some time with those reactions, and if it's happening that often, then sit for a while and see if it happens during a sitting and watch what comes up. Or here's an idea for you. Very often people ask me, well, how do I practice throughout the day? An option that I give, a suggestion that I offer sometimes is there's an application you can get on your phone called Mind Bell. It's one word, Mind Bell. And you can set it to ring a chime at various points throughout the day. At random. You can choose how often and, once an hour, randomize the whole thing. And it's like, okay, do that. And when you hear it, okay, whatever you're doing, stop for a minute, come to the breathing. You could do that with the boom cars. That could be your mind bell. You hear that and you feel that reaction. I'm going to sit for a minute. And you're actually turning an annoyance at that point into an opportunity. You are reframing what's happening and redirecting this volatile energy and perhaps channeling it into something that, even if the best move for you ends up being, I got to get the hell out of here, you still may take something valuable with you on the way out. I would suggest that. Thank you for that. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you very much.
Cheers.
I'm going to do that.
Awesome. Let me know how it works out. Anyone else? Yeah, Joey.
How would you recommend dealing with a stressor that is perhaps caused with like a relationship with perhaps a family member or a partner? And it's kind of like a ongoing battle where like you can kind of try to tune yourself out, but like maybe they're not satisfied with that. And like eventually the energy of the argument can like build anger within, me or anyone else, I guess. How would you recommend trying to maintain calm and composure and also make that an energy that's contagious rather than the anger being contagious in the room?
Wow, I love that. That's fantastic. About the contagious, that's great. I had a feeling that in the course of the Q&A for today's topic, someone would ask a question that would lead me to share what I'm about to share. And here we are. I can tell you an experience I had that may resonate, may help. I have a very close family member, my father, with whom I have the classic decades-long, it's complicated relationship. Lots of shit going on there. There was a tension between us, this not unspoken, but still sort of beneath the surface, comes up every once in a while, and tension that was going on between us for about 20 years. And it started to increase a few years ago until it finally came to a head. And I had one of those experiences, like I mentioned before, of disillusionment. What happened was I recognized in a way that he was behaving and speaking towards me that it went beyond that I couldn't just control his speech and actions towards me. The only way I can really describe it is I had this anger. And like I was talking at the beginning about the tunnel vision, this very tightly focused anger towards some things that he was doing and saying and had been doing and saying for quite some time that were quite hurtful. And he knew that they were quite hurtful because I told him continuously they were quite hurtful. So I had this very concentrated tunnel vision sort of anger on him as if it was a fire hose streaming, this powerful stream of water on this concentrated spot. And I can't say, like with any insight, I can't say how the insight happened to come up at this particular moment that it did. But he said just the right thing at just the right time. And I instantly just, as insight does, it just happened and just things snapped into focus all of a sudden. And this was at a time when I was doing a lot of reading on karma and cause and effect. I suddenly saw my father not just as singular person, dad, whatever, but within his entire context. And not just his entire context, but the entire context of everything before that. What the hell am I talking about? The way my dad was speaking and acting towards me had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with him. Because everything that we do and say ultimately has to do with us. We take things real personal like. But if I wanted to, the same way I look at things in an evolutionary context so that they'll make sense. If I wanted to consider my father's speech and actions, I had to do them against the context of his entire history. His childhood, his parents' childhoods, everything that preceded, some of the nasty shit that he experienced as a kid. If I was going to be angry at him, I needed to be angry at his parents. I needed to be angry at his upbringing. I needed to be angry at the Vietnam War. I needed to be angry at a lot of things in order to accurately include him in this anger, because it wasn't just him in a vacuum. And suddenly, this stream of water, this powerful stream of water that was hitting this one spot, like say it was like on a tapestry, it was hitting this one spot on a tapestry that was just destroying it. Now suddenly, no, I had to incorporate the whole tapestry, his whole background, where all this was coming from, stuff I'll never know. If I was going to be angry at what he was saying and doing, I had to be angry at everything that caused it. Logically, I had to. So suddenly, this water wasn't a single stream hitting one spot. It was a huge tapestry that had to be covered by this same amount of water. So instead of one tiny little focused stream, it was a droplet here and a droplet there and a droplet there and a droplet there, all kind of spread out. And what happens? What happens when little bits of water are all dispersed like that? They evaporate. When they're all hitting this one spot, they're destroying the thing. When they spread out to take everything into account, they evaporate. And in that moment, I saw the whole thing and recognized, holy shit, this guy is doing things and saying things I can't imagine doing and saying to anybody, let alone their son. Can you imagine the suffering someone must be experiencing to speak and act in such a hurtful way? And everything just snapped into focus. That does not mean that I still place myself in the line of that kind of fire. because what he was doing and saying was not appropriate. So in that moment, I established boundaries around that. It's not, again, about me sitting here eating a rotten tomato because I'm a fucking meditator, right? I established boundaries around that. But I needed the clear seeing in order to know those boundaries needed to be set and what those appropriate boundaries are. And 2 years on, I can tell you, I'm much better off for it. I don't hate my father. I haven't cut him out of my life. But there are boundaries now, healthy boundaries. And this came out of well-directed angry energy. Power, not force. Not acting out, not suppression. Finding that appropriate option in between. Does that help?
Yes, very much so. I appreciate you opening up with that personal example. What type of boundaries, specifically, if you don't mind me asking, if it might be helpful to me, were you able to establish?
That's difficult to nutshell. It's definitely not something I can squeeze into 30 seconds. There are many ways to try to establish boundaries, and it can be productive to let the other person know, hey, I need to set some kind of boundary here, not because of you, for me. Again, what we say and do, it's about us. So whatever your situation is, if there's a particular topic that should not be broached, then, okay, I'm no longer going to discuss this. We should not discuss this. Again, I can't squeeze mine into 30 seconds. It's difficult to advise on in sort of a general way because situations are so different. So this is the kind of thing I would say, let's take this offline if it's something you want to explore more. It's just too much we could really dive into in this format. But feel free to reach out if that's something that you'd like to explore offline.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you. Time for at least one more if someone else would like to jump in. Hi, yes, Chloe.
You said earlier about anger, like we shouldn't welcome it, but I find that I do. I'm a suppressor. I'm so habituated to rationalizing for the other person that I accommodate. And when I do feel angry, I don't take it to act out. But to me, it's a welcome signal. I'm like, oh, isn't that great? I'm feeling it. And I actually feel very pleased when I can feel it. Usually I take it as a sign that I need some boundaries. So I just sort of wanted to say, can we modify we shouldn't welcome it? Or am I looking at it in a distorted way?
There is a difference between saying that something is unwelcome, which is you're ascribing a negative to this feeling, and saying that you are not welcoming something. Saying you're not welcoming something doesn't mean you are telling it to go away. It sounds like it in the way that we use language, but it's not. Not welcoming it's saying what you're not doing. To me, I take it as a neutral. Usually, colloquially, if we're saying you're not welcome, then we're saying you can't come in. I'm using it differently here. I'm using it very literally. Say we're not welcoming it. It doesn't say we're telling it to go away. Welcoming it is just simply something we aren't doing. We're saying, oh, it's here. It's here. Now, we do often welcome it. We do often welcome it. If you welcome it, notice that. There's no use in condemning our feelings. It goes back to the reaction versus response. Are we choosing what we feel? No. If we berate ourselves for having a certain feeling, does that mean we're then going to feel its opposite? No. So if we're noticing, oh, here's anger, and I'm kind of enjoying it, I'm welcoming it. Okay, that's what's happening. Oh, but I really shouldn't be doing that. Okay, so what's happening right now is you have a storyline saying that you shouldn't be feeling a way that you're feeling. I shouldn't have been thinking I shouldn't be feeling that way. I'm a terrible practitioner. Okay. So now you've got another storyline from your first storyline about the thing that you're feeling. And look at how this is progressing, and come back to the only question that ever matters in this practice. Am I increasing or decreasing my own suffering right now? Oh, I appear to be increasing my suffering right now. And how do I stop that? Do I stop that by trying to force it, control it? Oh, whoops. That's kind of the natural reaction, isn't it? But is that really working? No. So what do? I guess I'll just keep watching for now. And as we continue watching, and we see how the cycle never actually pays off the way we think it's going to, that disillusionment I've talked about several times today eventually naturally arises, and we have that moment where we clearly see what we're doing and what we're getting for it. And when we clearly see it, not that thing that says, oh, I shouldn't be in the storyline, and no, when we actually clearly see it, after enough times of watching it and saying, no, what is here right now? We start to see what's actually happening. And once we really see it, we don't need a lot of convincing to make some changes. That's been my experience. I hope that helps for now. We're a few minutes over. I want to respect people's time. Always feel free to reach out. Thank you all so much.